Welcome to the GreatBase Tennis Podcast. I'm Steve Smith. My guest tonight is Gino Octa. We're in Boynton Beach, Florida. It's the poor man's Boca Raton. I love Boynton Beach, love tennis, love the opportunity to try to help people with tennis, and it's great to have Gino tonight. 2020, maybe we talk about 20 students from Gino's trip this time around, and maybe 20 players from the past. But this is third generation. Gino works up at the Richmond Hill Country Club. We had Richard Hernandez as a guest, and then Miran Mann. But Gino, great name, Gino. I think my name is rather boring, Steve Smith. If I was coaching you and you're a kid every day, Gino the wino, get over here. But give us a start. Where did you start your journey in tennis?
Yeah, so I was born in Dubai, and my dad was a tennis pro out there, and we moved to Canada when I was around 8 years old, and my dad shortly got a job working as a tennis coach at Richmond Hill Country Club under Richard.
Jerry.
So my dad, Jerry, was, he's been coaching Richmond Hill Country Club for a very long time. He's coached Miran when he was younger, so he's been there for forever, but I started working there. I went to school. I started playing tennis there around 8 years old. Didn't take it seriously till I was around 11, 12. And, I was fortunate to work under a lot of different coaches who you had significant influence on. Like Richard, Miran, you know them very well. I've worked with coaches like Hubert, Carlo Lavalsi, Myron Grunberg, all alongside my dad.
That last name, Hubert Crash. Really interesting. One's life in tennis and one's path in tennis. But you played provincial, national, junior tennis.
Yeah, so I did pretty well in juniors in Canada. I ended up winning a provincial title a couple times, and I was pretty high rankedly in the nation. I had a lot of success at provincial level. I had success at a national level, and I ended up playing college tennis at Utah.
Let's interrupt right there where the Georgia hat. I know with your sister, who was also a provincial champion, indoor, outdoor, age 15. She's won the 18s. You went on a trip to where? Vanderbilt, Ohio State, and Georgia.
Yeah, so we drove down from Toronto, and we got a chance to visit. We decided to make a road trip out of it and visit a couple schools on the way down. She's only a sophomore. But, we got to see, she's never really seen, she's visited a couple Ivy League schools, but she's never really seen any big-time tennis schools. So we visited Ohio State, which I know Connor went to, your son, and we passed by Vanderbilt, which was great to see as well, and Georgia on the way down. All great facilities.
Yeah, great tennis, too. You got to be careful with what hat you wear. I one time went to Ohio State to visit, and I had been out at UCLA, and I showed up wearing a UCLA hat. My son Connor says, "What are you doing?" And I go, "What do you mean?" He goes, "You can't be in this building wearing that hat." I actually was with Austin Krychek and Jameer Jenkins, and I had this UCLA hat. And Jenkins, he went to Virginia. And I said, "Jenkins, if you can't do this, that," I can't remember what it was, hit a serve above this location on the back fence, whatever it was. I said, "You have to wear this hat." What it was is to wear the hat for an hour or have your photo taken in the hat. And he said, "Okay, I couldn't wear this thing for an hour." But we did take his photo wearing a UCLA hat. But you decided at one point to pursue finance, and you went back home and went to York, right?
Yeah, so I ended up moving back home to Toronto when I finished my undergrad there. I graduated a degree in finance and economics, and when I moved back home, I got a job working for Richard, coaching at Richmond Hill Country Club. And after I graduated, I decided to take it full time and work more closely with Miran, working with a lot of the younger kids. I was working a little bit with everything. I was coaching adults, but recently, after I graduated, I started working more with the high performance kids.
And our listeners, Gino, we'd ask him about his first visit to our program, but he's been here recently, better part of a month. We just had a young coach from Montreal, Patrick Jeffrion. Boom Boom Jeffrion, the name of a great Montreal hockey player. With, but he did his same thing. He had a degree in finance economics, but he decided to make tennis his career. Why did you choose my
Well,
English?
when I got into coaching, it was just as a part-time job while I was finishing my degree. And when I graduated, it was at a time when my sister actually started taking tennis a bit more seriously as well. So, I started spending more time with her and spending, the group of kids that we've brought down, I've known since they've been very young. They were actually, when I started working full time, they were probably the first group of kids I had started working with. And, there's guys like Tal, who has spent a significant time down here, but his generation of juniors is also another group that I spent. My first trip, the first time I ever met you was, it's probably about 10 years ago. I came down with Miran, and Tal was one of the, I think he was 11 or 12 at the time.
Yeah, let's go through the Tal Goodman. In some cases, we never ever use a last name, but Tal spoke to him the other day because his brother's here, younger brother Yuval, and so what do you call it? FaceTime. So all of a sudden, his brother hands me this phone, and I'm looking at Tal Goodman. There's another player here. I just call him Malik because it has a strong last syllable. Aiden Malik. Aiden Malik did quite well. He's 2 in the 12s, I believe, in Canada, and he's been here before. So we can talk about that. People's first visit, second visit. So Malik says, Tal Goodman, he's the smartest human being I've ever met. I got such a kick out of that. But with Tal, I remember when he came, he was like 10 years old. And, we tease and say we should call it GreatBase Solid Fundamentals. We are a little bit cross-eyed when people say, are you a great baser? It's just, how could you argue with having a great base? But so, I remember that trip. But then Tal, I guess we could go with, the other day I took a phone call from David Getz, who's the coach at UPenn, where Tal is currently playing.
Yeah.
And Tal, I think for those players that are a little bit small in size, stature, maybe he was 5'4", and now maybe he's 5'8"-ish. He's 5'8" in the program, or 5'8" standing on his tiptoes, but 5'9" in the program on the roster sheet. But I think it was really good for you to say, hey, the coach Getz, can I just put this on speakerphone? The coach next to me is from the same club. And then just to hear a few things, just so many things. What would come to your mind from that conversation to share with the other players? And I think that's the whole thing is that, you just listen to coaches and they say you need to know about the people who went before you.
Yeah, no, I think that conversation, just listening in on that was just so insightful. And, he mentioned something how, coming in, Tal was last on the roster. And, he was getting his ass beat by the guys.
Up. Let's go, stop. We're okay. That's all right. We're going to keep it clean.
Sorry.
Yeah, we're going to keep it clean. But now keep in mind, Canadians, they're all bilingual, English and profanity. But that's all right. That's okay. No one will be offended. It's okay. Don't worry, Gino.
No, but no, he said
getting his butt kicked.
But Coach Getz was saying how he's probably the most improved guy, and because of he has such a good foundation, technical base, that his best tennis is ahead of him. And there's guys on the team that are right now ahead of him, but because of their technical limitations, he really thinks that Tal has a lot more upside and more. I don't know how to say it, but he worded it really well. Just his tennis career.
There's not a ceiling.
There's not a ceiling. Yeah, exactly. There's not a ceiling to his game because he's got such a good technical foundation.
And he did say that these, and certainly it's not about just talking about his players of today, but he's been coaching tennis. He's 65 years old. Good head of hair. Doesn't look it, but David Getz, smart guy, PhD. With Tal played his first match singles and doubles, and they played against Navy. This is something else that I think's of interest from a tennis standpoint. So Chris Garner, who was a great player in his own right. Played at Georgia. I think he played for a year. Then he coached at Ohio State under Ty Tucker. And they're great friends. He did so well at Amherst, but he went right up to Coach Getz and said, I can guess where your number 6 player was, who taught them. And I hear that it's not really fair because I spent so much time with Tal, but I more of a supplemental coach. I mean, he was taught by Richard and Miron and the whole team at Richmond Hill Country Club in Richmond Hill, Ontario, just north of Toronto. So Chris Garner goes, I know, it's my name in third person. Steve Smith taught him. And then David said, my players don't have, when I give lessons to somebody, they just don't have that distinctive look. But, certainly with Tal, I mean, I think that even though he's 18 years old, he was just an after-schooler playing 2 hours of tennis a day. He wasn't one of these full-timers. He did end up spending 6 months with us after graduation. But I told Getz, I said, well, one of the reasons Chris Garner's going to pick that up, this past summer, he tried to recruit one of our players. But he brought his sons to work with me, I think 4 different times. So he knows. We go very, very slow. And I'm flattered by the fact in some ways that people can recognize their students. You and I were watching an academy just yesterday, and it's like no one's going to recognize anybody coming out of that academy. There's no signature. There's no... and there should be. Is it a short, compact swing? And is the swing, the racket getting below the ball? Does the kid have a long hitting zone? No 2 tennis players end up looking exactly the same. But but some of the players actually with Tal said, hey, Coach, I don't know if this guy's going to be able to help us out. But I think coming back to the relationship between Richard Hernandez and David Getz, Richard, he was pretty chilled when he was a student of mine many, many years ago, but you can just hear Richard going, David, I'm telling you, this guy will play for you. And, granted, he took the year off after high school and he grew. And, he's a sleeper in the sense. I said, you got to watch the guy play basketball. I mean, he's athletic. Brain typing, we talked about this on the podcast, but he doesn't. I told David, I said, there's one word, he just has to be more aggressive. But then, the people listening is that the next call, I tell his brother, I said, hey, get your brother on the line again. And I'm going to tell him, I said, hey, this is what David's saying, that, you're hitting through the court, your shots are penetrating, but you've got to hit with more trajectory, you got to hit deeper. And, what you're looking for as a player is every little detail, anything that's going to help you out. Anything's going to help you out. I think we could backpedal 2020 if we were to go, the 20 people that are here today, or you mentioned some names already, we can bring those back up. But today we ended up at Florida Atlantic University. I'm walking around and going, at first I was thinking, I haven't been on this campus in 45 years. But actually, I was the director of tennis at Seguzo Basket, which is now Chris Everett's, and I remember going to the FAU library for 2 days. Why I went there instead of a public library is I set a meeting up with one of the professors. I want to find out as much as I could. This is in the early 90s about homeschooling because it was just new on the scene. But it's certainly a different place now. But we found for just today, the second practice, we have a place where there's 16 3-wall racquetball courts. It's kind of a tongue twister. 3-wall racquetball here in Florida, and they're always empty. And we took the kids there, and they were just 2 hours of hitting. That's a lot of balls hit. And then we went to the university, and we've only been down in this area 3.5 months. We need to get more and more organized, but the young guys from your program, so I'd say there was 16 players there, and easily 8 of them were from your program, and they ran 12 400s. And the best was 115 on the average. Some of the younger kids or some of the kids that are not up to that at this point, they just ran 10. Run one, get a minute off. I mean, I remember doing that when I was a kid, but that really became popular not that many years back when people found out that's one of the things that Andy Murray was doing.
Yeah. I think a lot of our guys too, just talking about, like the FAU, I was there the other day and it was such a great, I was talking to Coach Natalia about it. I was like, why didn't we bring our guys here from the get-go? Because it's such a great facility. And I think, the first week we were here, those guys running, it was just like, it was a mess for them. But, now looking a couple weeks later, and one of our guys, it took him this long to finally start looking like an athlete. And I think just being exposed to that, and I think just seeing other athletes, especially in a facility like that, was just a great motivator for them.
With all these names, Natalia Sorkin, she was on one of our earlier podcasts. The group I was driving, we drive by the stadium, and I said, Natalia and I talked about that. We've got to get in that stadium, have you run stairs. You're hard pressed in Florida to find hills. There's not too many hills to run.
Yeah.
But you need to be able to run anywhere and everywhere. We still, in just 3.5 months here, as a group or as a standing workout, we haven't been going to the beach. It's very interesting. A lot of tennis players, they hear beach and they think workout because they don't go to the beach, just kind of hang out and throw the Frisbee. All these names, Carlo Lavolsi, he's a very successful businessman. And I remember Richard Hernandez sending Carlo to me to be trained. What a personality. I remember, being wrong. I was up in Toronto. My kids wanted to play ice hockey, so everybody has their motive. So Richard set it up where I could teach in Toronto. And what a great time with my kids playing ice hockey. But Carlo, really sight unseen, with a few other successful business people, was going to sponsor Vicky Duval. But I remember telling Vicky at one point, I said, Duval, you calling people with their last name, Duval, you don't have a running program. And next thing I know is I hear the door, we had a place that could sleep at that time, maybe 20 players. And you hear the door shut, and it's a very safe neighborhood, but it's like, okay, it's like 10:30 at night, she's going for a run. But the athlete you mentioned, who for the first time in this trip looked like an athlete, but he asked me, it was late at night, he goes, can I go for a run? And you just think, where does that all come from? So we have these character meetings. We have these two, a coach and a player in from Montreal. They came at the end. And the kid from Montreal comes in, and he's won the provincial title. Was it 18s or?
Yeah, he won the under 18 provincial title.
So he wins the under 18s, and so all the kids know that. Even though your group for the most part, Malik just got back from Italy, so he's traveling with Tennis Canada some, but for the most part, they just have, their lens is not very wide, their exposure. But for me, it's storytelling, is, reflective thought, reactive thought, reflective thought. That just reminded me of that story with Duval. And, and it's like, okay, you got to start running. You have to have a running program. You need to know your 40, your 400. You need to know your heart rate, your rest. You need to know your recovery rate after 1 minute. We always tell people, if you don't like to run, play golf. I think kids who aspire, a lot of kids are listening to this with their parents as they drive to tennis practice or tennis tournaments. You need to be conditioned to be a college tennis player. College tennis is a goal. Pro tennis is a dream. And how are you in the gym? How are you at the track? I think a great thing is, can you start in the gym and end in the gym? And even if the gym is, okay, maybe it's your garage and you're on an exercise mat and you're doing yoga for 10 minutes, but then you do a technical routine in front of a mirror. You could start your day and end the day that way if you're really organized. And that's where, get off the cell phone. Get off the cell phone.
Yeah, I agree. I think, one thing that our guys that we brought down, I think, one just ongoing message has been like they've all had to reinvent themselves as athletes. Back home, they're not accustomed to working this hard, like crack of dawn at 6 a.m, 7 a.m. So I think, looking back at when they first started to now, it's like a lot of them are starting to, it started to click with them, and they look a lot stronger too, and not just physically but mentally.
No, 12 400s is healthy.
Yeah.
Run one, and even if they're some of them were at, they were just under 90 seconds. One of the dads, Natalia's husband, Alexei Sorokin, he's there, and he's really got into running. I'm calling him Skinny Man. And the kids got in the van and they go, I can't believe that guy. But he just ran a half marathon. I think he was like 6:02 a mile. It's just passion. One of the kids said, could you repeat that? This comes from Jim Lair. Wherever you put energy, you want a red car, you want a shiny red car, you can find a way to have a red, shiny car. Lair says that. You want to have a big bicep, you can have a big bicep. But a kid asked me, can you repeat that? Yeah, whatever you put energy into. One of the highlights, I think, of your group being down here is Nicole Erickson, who's in charge of mental performance here at the FM. I don't think I said that with our intro. We're talking to you, as always, or here in most recent weeks, FM Tennis Performance Center. And for her talking to the kids, imagery, And I do that all the time. You see yourself as a champ or a chump. But like Lavosi, I haven't talked to Carlo in quite some time. Actually, Richard was talking to Carlo and some others at one time about a Tennis Smith Village, and I was allowed to pick out where this would happen, and that was pretty flattering. So it's amazing how many projects say, okay, we could do this, we could do that, but we have been working with these players. I think a lot of times, okay, you're doing A, but you're thinking about, gee, you'd like to do B. And the brass tacks of it is, you're doing A as a tennis coach. You got to pay your bills. This is what I do. I get up every day and I coach. But I think that psychic income is it's not just another day. It's not like just another tennis lesson. And I think that people they understand that when you say, okay, we're going to get up at sunrise, because the coaches are getting up at sunrise.
Yeah.
And you're, NFL days. We're working 18-hour days. But I could, you mentioned a few people in the beginning. Go back with Carlo. Here's a fun story with Carlo. I was with him and Richard at an Orange Bowl, or an Eddie Herr, and very proud of his heritage. And he's actually cooking pasta, and he's preparing spaghetti, and he brought some pasta with him. And one of the kids was about to put ketchup on the pasta, on the spaghetti. He was about to put ketchup on the spaghetti. I remember Lavosi going, if you put that ketchup on the spaghetti, I will kill you. He really didn't mean it, but perhaps the kid felt it. There's so many stories like that. But tell us, 2020, some of the other names you mentioned.
So, Hubert, when I first started competing, which I worked a lot with my dad, but one of the coaches that I spent a lot of time with between the ages 12 to 15 was Hubert Crash, and I know you've had...
Well, with Hubert Crash, I think there's value for our listeners. He's playing at the University of Texas. He's in the lineup. That's big time to play tennis at the University of Texas. We had two players at the same time playing in the lineup, and at that time, there were 17 million people in Texas. So Hubert, he goes to play a money tournament, and it was a neighboring town to Tyler, Texas, where we were based. It was Longview. And Dave Anderson, he was with us for a long, long time. He's been a guest on our podcast. So he has autonomy. He's running one club, and the next thing he was running two clubs. And Hernandez, I remember, Hubert Crash. Anderson's not only running the money tournament, but he's hosting Crash, maybe a few other players as well, but Crash stayed in his house. And people say, how do you remember these things? Anderson's the person who remembers what court you were on and what the score was. And Hubert, he just had dirty laundry, and he just had it in a basket, and he handed it to Anderson's wife, just assuming that she would do his laundry. And she said, well, let me show you where the machines are. That's a tennis kid. Like, I beat up on tennis kids. I'm sorry, but you should be able to do your own laundry when you're in college. So Anderson told him, he said, hey, you need to make changes in your game. And Anderson wasn't that much older. Now, Crash would tell you that Anderson played him and beat him, but it was while he was changing his strokes. Now, he rebuilt his game. Now, here's a guy who got to the Junior Wimbledon doubles final. He's playing at the University of Texas. As an amateur, he went over to Japan. He was ranked 1 in Japan. He never played on the Canadian Davis Cup team, but he was good enough to be a practice player. I can tell you all sorts of stories about his game. I think you have to mention Robert Steckley. I'll tell you how that ties in with Hubert. But Hubert, I did a number of things, but David, just like I didn't start Tal Goodman, Anderson really helped him. I know then Richard Bodian, who we've trained, he spent a lot of time with Hubert. I remember Hubert being with us at Seguso Bassett when Vince Spadia. So Anderson and I were working with Vince Spadia. Spadia was already a great player, so we're not telling anybody, okay, we've coached Vince Spadia. Although when we were working with him, he won the Orange Bowl. And a kid by the name of Jamison Hawthorne, Craig Tiley, whose name comes up quite often, one of our students, he was at Illinois, but he first went to Illinois. He was recruiting what we would call tier 2 players from Texas. Hawthorne was good, but he was not in super champs. He was in champs. That was something that they should have never done for years. That's the Texas mentality. They break the juniors into 3 tiers, which in many ways is very good. There was many positives to it, but the football, it was Super Bowl. So you're a super champ or regular. The poor kids who were in the lowest group. Are you regular? Yeah, I'm regular. And the other kids were super champ. And I mean, I'd hear things, are you super? Yeah, I'm super. And then the one question, do you soup up? And I would go, oh my God. But with, so Jameson has a pretty big serve. He's there in the morning. Hubert, for some reason, he wasn't there in the morning. They're in Boca training with us. And Hawthorne had a sense of humor. So he's just telling Hubert, give it up. Give it up. This kid, Spadia, he goes, he's taking my first serves. And it was just a disaster. And if you go back, I mean, he really returned serve well. He was very good off the ground. He was Agassi-like in many, many ways as far as short, compact swings. But no, I can remember working at the Seguso Bassett. We were working with a number 1 girl in the 12s in Florida. Anderson, again, he'd be able to tell you, there's a girl by the name of Michelle Greenwood from your club. She came down, and then she came back like 4 or 5 months later, and she beat the number 1 junior in Florida. I remember Robbie was in charge. He goes, how's that happen? I go, she's not rebuilding her game. She started from square one with Hernandez. She did this when, I could have her story wrong, but say if she was 7, 8 years old, she was very young. But, I think the listeners can find value in this where here's a guy, Hubert Crash, University of Texas. He rebuilt his game. It's not like he stepped away from the competition as well. Then he was never out of the lineup. But I mean, I could tell you about his tennis game. Pinched the shoulder. He wasn't loose in the right shoulder, and then he never got the point where he really had a big serve. He got to be number 1 in the 35s with the ITF and the ITF. But now, one thing with that is that it's very expensive, and the people that are ranked really high in the ITF 35, 45s, it's situational. Now, a lot of times, really good tennis players, they're by that time, male or female, they're married, they have children, and they can't play those tournaments. It's not like the best players. My resume used to read top 20 in Florida, and I wouldn't even mention that or put that on a resume now because people don't play open tournaments anymore. But that's when everybody played open tournaments. But I was 19, so top 20. Maybe he was 1. He was top 20. But I used to say that on any given day at the Miami International Airport, there was 20 people who could beat me. Because, are you playing enough tournaments to be ranked? I think that's one good thing about the UTR. So your first visit, I'll tell you a little bit about my first visit later, but why don't you go with a few more names?
Yeah, so actually one of the first visits, the first time I met you, one of my prominent memories was we came to that tennis club that you were working at, and I remember seeing young Liam Draxel there. And, I'd heard about him back home in Canada, and, he had been one of the more successful young juniors and under 10 or 12. But I think it's interesting to know for listeners to hear that, he was one of the guys that was with GreatBase at a young age. Now he's reached,
With Liam Draxel, I met him through Richard and through Carl Hale, the parents. They had a timeshare at Saddlebrook. His father, Brian, great guy, teaching pro. He's a great competitor. They used to, so initially for sure, we did video work and, they were working off the video, but then he started working with Casey Curtis, who's obviously been very successful. He coached Raonic. Then he followed one's path. I know he was at Saddlebrook for a long time. So I would say, okay, we had an influence. I think, Brian, like if you were to ask him, he still follows our content. But, we tell people that we've coached a lot of number ones in college tennis, and Liam was one of them. But I don't tell people, oh, yeah, I coached Liam Draxel. It wasn't an elevator ride like a lot of these coaches where they worked with him for 5 minutes. But what you could learn from that, the expression, the apple falls under the tree. The Greeks say, that we say that the apple doesn't fall very far from the tree. The Greeks say the apple falls under the tree. So Brian's a great competitor. Liam would play with anybody and everybody. I mean, here's a guy who got to be number one in the NCAAs last year. We spent a lot of time talking to his dad, and his mom was there. We did a little video work because one of his dad's friends is a biomechanist with, my memory, maybe it's the Cincinnati Reds. And we did a little video work on his serve. But he loved to compete, great attitude, smile on his face, would play anybody and everybody. He was by no means a tennis snob. You get that all the time where kids like, am I playing with so-and-so? Who am I hitting with? I mean, I think that's worth just saying again and again on a podcast or a conversation with a tennis parent. Don't let your kid complain ever. If everybody played once a week, got on the phone, called somebody up that was at a lower level than them, tennis would benefit tenfold. But everybody is cliquey. Everybody wants to play with a better player. But no, right now it's Liam Draxel, big, strong legs, great competitor. I think when you get to his level, I don't think it's fair or it's right for me to start saying, well, this is what I think. Because I think it's different when you're talking about kids in their formative years. But, he's at a point where now the speculation is he going to be able to make money. And, but it's very, very interesting. And just to keep hanging in there. You also think with someone like that is that it's not easy to be living in Canada and find a way for your kid to be in Florida. It's not easy.
Yeah. I know he's been here. I've known him for a really long time. Just following his tennis career as a junior and now as a collegiate player. But I think there's other guys like, there's been so many like Jeremy Langer, someone who's had a lot of success in NCAAs.
Langer has I think he's won the most matches at Indiana. Now, there's another Jeremy, the coach, Jeremy Wertzman. You get on our course, Tennis Intelligence Applied. And Wertzman, that's a great story with Richmond Hill. So I took a job at Tennis Corporation of America. Doug Cash, who ran the operation basically for years, told me years later, he goes, well, that was not really the reason I was brought in. They brought me in because they had a situation where the pros just couldn't get along, there was a point where there was even a fist fight in a pro meeting. So I come in and there's 20 plus pros and I was looking through Alan Schwartz and his organization, TCA. They had 55 clubs, and I would have loved to have them embrace what we've put together as far as a curriculum. So with my train of thought, help me out, senior moment here. Where was I?
Oh, we were talking about Jeremy.
Yeah, so no, thanks. Senior moment. So Jeremy, you got to help me out here. That's Andy Fitzell. Brandon Flanagan does a great job. Andy Fitzell helped me with these podcasts.
No, we were talking about Jeremy.
Yeah. But let me tell you about Wertzman. So I show up, and one of the smartest things I did was I wasn't going to teach for the first 30 days. I was there 30 days and just observed. Everyone thought I was laid back, easygoing. And in the meantime, I was getting every kid filmed, every kid skill tested. And I took the most egotistical coaches and filmed their students, and anyway, that's another story in itself. But I didn't get out any information for the first 30 days. So here's a kid, Jeremy Wertzman. He's ranked 3 in the East. So he's winning. He's got the it thing. He was. I mean, I remember taking Jeremy to Richmond Hill many times. There was a guy who, give me a minute, I think of his name, but he was ranked 77. Very easy to remember. He's 77, and this kid's in the 7th grade. And Mark Wertzman played at Ohio State. So this kid, we're playing matches on a Saturday, and we're playing matches on a Sunday. And the kid who was ranked 77 in the NCAAs, he loses to Jeremy's older brother, Mark Wertzman. And I said, hey, come on back tomorrow. You can play Wertzman. And, of course, I knew he'd come back. He was so upset that he lost. And he comes back, and I didn't tell him that he was going to play Jeremy Wertzman. I just told him he was going to play Wertzman. So then he comes back. He's 77 in the NCAAs, and Wertzman's in the junior high, and he wins. The other guy played threatened and played tight. But so this is where Jeremy Wertzman's parents, Mark and Judy, were convinced that he needed to change his game. Your kid's ranked 3 in the East, and you show up and go, I think he needs to change every shot in the book. And, the videotape, we always say science, logic, and imagery don't work. So I called Richard up. And by that time, Richard Hernandez was working at Richmond Hill, and I knew the players, and I'd been up there and such and such. And you just have to drive around Lake Ontario. So I said, hey, you got to bring Michelle Greenwood down here. And she was a year younger. It was just one set. So this 10-year-old girl beats this 11-year-old boy. And, and again, it's a fun video clip to look at. We have every stroke, but, it's just, at age 11, you see him hitting a backhand volley, and then you see the change. And he became a national junior champion. He was number 1 in the NCAAs. That's somebody that, I didn't spend, I spent quite a bit of time with Liam Draxel, but here's a guy that, he definitely had the signature. But, one thing too with Liam is that, he wasn't, you got to the point where he wasn't working with his dad. I'd say his dad was always his coach, but he started working with someone else, and it's like, okay. And that's where you say, okay, okay, no problem. You can provide service. Providing service is okay. Here's some courts, here's some players, here's some drills. You don't have to be everybody's technician.
Yeah.
But Langer's the same age as my son, and Randy Bloomendale. We had Chuck Creasy on a podcast. A lot of people just told me they really, really enjoyed listening to Chuck. I think he's one of the best speakers, best motivators in the game. So Jeremy and Connor, 2 peas in a pod, they could have both gone much, much further with the tennis if they had a little bit more drive. But Langer, I think that Langer worked at it harder. He could have played Davis Cup for Canada. Yeah. He had the skill set.
I remember, he's, as a junior, he was just so good. He had such good hands. Really good lefty. He spent a lot of time down here with you as a junior.
Yeah, a lot of time with, to be down here in Florida in the Florida heat. You're a Canadian boy. And I think parents need to hear stories about kids who've tanked. And, so we're Langer, we're at a junior tournament, and, he just, Vince Lombardi, fatigue makes cowards of us all. And, I could ramble about tanking, but no, so I think that it's, it's not like you're, say, under a microscope, but, just, okay, well, what happened with this kid's tennis game? And I really think the governing body of tennis, the USTA, is there should be accountability. Okay, who's playing tennis? They signed up, and, coaches should really be working together. Just like educators, how are we doing teaching math? How are we doing teaching English? And what are, how are we progressing with kids in science? And we have tests. And, I think with the skills tests, perhaps, okay, we're not going to get into grip, swing, body, but, you know, 100-ball test, 100 balls, feeding 100 balls that takes a fair bit of time. But, just for simple math, okay, feed a kid 10 shots and then let them know where they land. And then even you get a point where you could just, give them a piece of paper. Now it would be done electronically, but where did the 10 shots land? And what was their score? That's where I think kids in basketball, okay, they just know that, hey, the ball's going in the hoop. Who else you got on there?
Well, it's that kind of skill, those kind of drills. When you talk about like tiebreaker tests, skills tests, you remember you telling me a story about Mario Cosentino and Miron, how they would, as juniors, they would just go out and do a tiebreaker test all the time on their own. And I think with our group of kids that we've brought down, a lot of them, coming down here, they never really took initiative to do that kind of stuff back home. So I think that story of Mario and Miron doing it out on their own all the time, I think is so important.
I think one person, Frank and even Lenny. Lenny was not Lenny, father of Miron. He wasn't the guy who was on the court, but helping out with rides and helping out with phone calls, just making it happen. The mom's involved too, for sure. But with Frank Cosentino, father of Mario and David, I remember telling Richard, I said, no, we don't want a dad teaching tennis. If they're not a tennis teacher, and I think that's where parents get a lot of trouble. They make the mistake of starting to tell their kid how to hit the ball. Just tell them where to hit the ball. And go, so I'm going to feed you 10 balls. We'll break Peter Burwash, a Canadian. We'll break the court into 4 quadrants. How many forehands can you hit? And again, just like, feeding breadcrumbs to a pigeon, everybody can feed balls. Just toss a ball, and how many forehands can they hit? Maybe it's just in the quadrant straight ahead. So up over the net, up over the service line, how many can you get out of 10? But so tiebreaker test 2, tiebreaker test 3, we usually don't get past tiebreaker test 1. It is the first question I ask kids when they come back. Have you done the tiebreaker test? And usually they say no. And I know it's a little bit more difficult in an indoor court situation. Say outdoor, there's a lot of people in the southern part of the United States, there's empty courts in their neighborhood that you could go to do the tiebreaker test. Tiebreaker test 2 is getting the ball, now we call it over the 10 and under line. And I think Andy Fitzell has really added to that, where take the volley. We're teaching strategy, close in, get 3 feet from the net, 130 degrees volume potential, and be able to volley cross court. But just in the tiebreaker test, take the volley deep. But Mario and Miron, they used to do that on their own. They would, back in the day, there was no 10 under line, so they would get skip ropes. Now, something I've said before over and over again, this story comes up all the time, it's not to beat up on Tennis Canada, but federations. I'm at the tournament. There's a young guy, his last name, 99% sure it was Silva, big kid in the 14s. Looked like he was ready to, enter college, a big kid. And he wins the 14s, lost to Frankie Danzovic. So Mario wins 3rd place, and he's going to Japan. The 14s are in Japan. I believe he's already been suited up. They've already ordered his maple leaf. You got a great flag in Canada. So last second, they decide, the governing body of tennis, we're going to take 2 players and 2 coaches. And I just think, oh boy, that wasn't fair. But no, so yeah, you just can come back and you get a visual. But if you really, Paul McDonald, who's a longtime friend, been in tennis forever, I would consider him a tennis intellectual. Once you've coached someone for a long period of time, it's not quite like bringing up a child, but it's, you weren't there changing the diapers. I think Bollettieri makes you think he was there when he was changing Agassi's diapers. But actually, Andre had won the national 14 indoors before he ever met Nick. So that means you're pretty good. But yeah, go on and on with these players. Go ahead, who else you got?
Will you tell me a story about Frank Danzovic? And, Andrew Schneider was someone that you brought up before too. who's had a lot of experience?
Yeah, I mean, jot that down. So my senioritis here. Andrew Schneider is smaller than I am. He's a top 50 player in the world. So Richmond Hill, listeners, is a beautiful, beautiful facility. And I'm going to help them with corporate outings. And we interview Andrew Schneider. So he shows up, and it's a Canadian tennis magazine. He's on the picture looking like you've seen Nadal so many times. He's down on his knees. He's clenching his fists. He had beaten Boris Becker. At that time, Becker was number one in the world. We ended up not doing anything with Andrew, but his father vacuumed courts at Mayfair West. And no connection 20 years later, Rayonich's father. And they both had, what we would say, which I think maybe be racial, is a white-collar job, blue-collar job. But anyway, they were working manual labor, vacuuming courts early in the morning, but they did that so their kids could hit balls. I think parents need to know that. Hungry dog hunts best. I mean, you're going to get out what you put in. But Danzevic, I spent little or no time with Danzevic. On the other hand, he spent a lot of time looking at a video I made. I believe the coach's last name was Carter. All these years go by, but it grew. This is great for people here in Niagara Falls. Tell me Bruno. I should know Bruno's last name. Bruno from Niagara Falls. What is it?
Bruno Gostinelli.
Yeah, I worked with him, and it was tragic. He was killed in a motorcycle accident a couple of years back. He was working for Tennis Canada. I think he became, if not ranked, he was ranked very high. I think he might have been one in the country.
Yeah, he played for Kentucky.
I don't know if he was ranked one, but he was very good. So I remember when he was young, his father saying he's going to the net. I mean, that was like so great for me to hear. But with I made videos, and the coach was supportive of that. Richard arranged it. But turn the clock ahead. Danzevic, he was called the poor man's Roger Federer. One-handed backhand. He complete player, could play all over the court. And we're not talking about chicken liver. This guy gets to be 65, I think, in the world. And I know he beat Roddick. I think Roddick had the flu, not to take anything away from Danzevic, but it's like when Federer's first match, he lost to Nadal. He probably shouldn't have played that match. It makes you wonder if it would have changed the rivalry at all. But I remember he went 3 sets with Nadal. So Myron Grunberg comes into the picture in many, many different areas. So Myron is coaching Frankie. So Myron has respect for what we do, and he asked Richard to spend some time with Frankie, and Richard said, all right, come into my office. And he goes, I want you to watch this tape, this little kid hitting the ball. And Frankie, by that time, is an established player on the tour, and Frankie's going, why am I watching this? And Richard the Bear goes, look at it, watch it, don't take your eyes off of it. And then he takes a second look, and he goes, that's me. And Richard goes, exactly. That's what you need to do. You need to go back and do everything that's on that tape. There's a clip of him on our course, Tennis Intelligence Applied. I was with Matt Clore at the U.S. Open, someone who's been on a podcast, national coach of the USTA, and Frankie walked by, and I didn't interrupt him. But I one time was at a tournament we was at, and the Leafs it was Stanley Cup time, and the Leafs, everybody in Toronto wants to talk about the Leafs, except for some of your visitors. Don't know anything about hockey. I go, they should kick you out of the country. So anyway, I talked to Danzevic, and he goes, like I'm a perfect stranger to him, and he goes, you're the guy from the tape, which just made me think, and which I found out from Richard, is that, and we have all sorts of stories where people work off the tapes we make. We were at a tournament, this Battle of Boca, and Malik, I thought he did great. He got beat 1-0, but you got a guy who's 12, and he's playing a guy who's 18. But the kid who's 18, he just spent a week with us, and you can already see it. And his father's already completed all 5 courses. All 5 courses. You could just see it. And that's what the GreatBase, that's what we'd like to see happen, is that it's free. And just go to work. just go to work. I know not all parents can do that, just because of their day-to-day schedule. But at this Battle of Boca, we saw Victor Lilov play, who, if people study our content, there's all sorts of film with Victor. And I heard recently, this person said it and that person said it, that after he worked with us for almost 5 years, if not 5, and go ahead and look at the footage. I'm sure we find film from age 8 to age 13, a ton of it. And people say, "Oh, I had to change everything about his game." And just like Liam Drexel, I wouldn't want to say, "Well, I watched him play. This is what I think." But I would, if someone said, "What do you think of Lilov's game?" People who study the Great Base, I said, "I'll tell you what. In my mind, I'm thinking, what would Vic Braden say about his game? What would Bill Jacobson, if I could just pick 3 people, what would Vic Braden say about his game? What would Bill Jacobson say about his game? And what would Welby Van Horn say about his game?" And just to say 3 words with those guys: Vic Braden, science.
Yeah.
Bill Jacobson, stats. Welby Van Horn, balance and athleticism. That's when people ask me, "Well, what do you think?" I'm going, let me go back to my mentors, and I'll tell you what I think that they would think. I like to tell people, I'm not going to tell you what I think, I'm going to tell you what I know. But Myron ended up, he's done so many things. He was Richard's boss. He was the general manager when Richard was hired. I don't know if you knew that.
No, I didn't know that.
So, and he's a tennis guy. He's a tennis guy. So he grew up in tennis, and so he was in the management side. I think he was in the player rep. I know he was not the Davis Cup captain, but the Davis Cup coach of Mexico. And I believe he was the Davis Cup coach, not captain, of Canada. And then he worked at Roddick's Academy. That was where he was an employee. And then his management skills really showed how he was a neat freak. He really came in and cleaned the place up. And then at one point, with a group of others, he was the owner. But with Myron, it took him time, to get a handle on what we do. But I remember meeting him the first time. I could talk a little bit about that trip. The first time I ever went to Richmond Hill and met Myron. But it takes time. It can't be a blink of an eye to try to have a handle on what we put together.
Well, that's the biggest thing I've learned on this trip. I've spent here about almost a month and a half now, and I think the biggest thing I've gotten out of this trip is just having a newfound respect for the content and the information I've been taught my whole life. I started at Richmond Hill. Basically, that's all I've known my whole life, and growing up, I've had the opportunity to work with a lot of different coaches that have come and gone throughout Richmond Hill. Like names like Huber, Carla Volsi, Myron Grunberg. I spent significant time with them, and they've all told me very similar things that I've now teaching to the kids that I work with. But one thing, when I was a junior, I had a lot of different coaches voicing their opinion towards me, and I was a pretty stubborn kid, so I never really absorbed the information, the great base knowledge, as much as I should have. I had a conversation with Richard about it, and I look back now as a coach and just see I wish I listened more and really paid attention more to the things that were being told to me, because now I saw it. I look back at my career as a junior. I had good results as a junior growing up at provincial and national level. I didn't have as much exposure internationally, but going to play college tennis, I realized there were a lot of holes in my game that I wish as a junior I had taken time to build my skills and really grow as an all-court player. As a junior, I was more of a baseliner. I had really good defense. I was really fast on court, and I never really took the time to work on my transition game, my volleys, and it hurt me in school, and I struggled playing in the lineup at Utah because of that.
In high altitude too, right?
In high altitude, yeah. So, my game style going into Utah was, I had to adapt. And, during my time there, I developed pretty good serve, and I had to serve and volley almost every point. And, my game grew in that respect. But, I think that's one thing a lot of juniors going to school, they don't, they win so much at in this small little pool, they don't really take the time to grow, and acquire skills as a junior, which I think now as a coach that's something that I want to really encourage a lot of my younger students that I work with, and especially the guys that we work, they're still, the guys that we brought down, they're so young, and I think they still have a lot of time to grow. And someone like Tal, for instance, Tal Goodman, he's at a young age, he's always been working on developing skills versus winning. I never thought he was someone that had a lot of success as a young junior, but he developed a great skill base, and now in school, like you said, I think a lot of his best tennis is ahead of him.
Well, yeah, and he's got a smart guy. I've coached so many people who are smarter than I am, but you got to be managed by stats. You have to force. You got to take time and space away from someone. When you talk about age, it comes back to Torbjörn Ulrich, the Great Dane. Saw him interviewed. When he was 48, he had age. His legs looked like he was 18. His legs, and so he was asked how old he was, and he looked at the person holding the mic and the camera crew, and he said, "Well, do you mean intellectually, physically, emotionally, chronologically?" And it's really interesting. You don't want to really be judgmental, but kids, be mature beyond your years. They dropped this with the SAT, Scholastic Aptitude Test. Familiarity breeds contempt. And you had to write an essay about it. And with, so your dad's a coach. That's a question to ask. You're coached by the same team. You're at a club. You were loyal to the club. Your dad works there. So I think you become familiar with the coaches, and you're bringing this group down. That's a point to touch upon, is we're not really teaching them anything they haven't already been told. Now, it's the situation, too. So Miron now is the director. Richard, after 34 years, is no longer working. He's doing projects, but he's no longer working. I wouldn't say he's retired, but you're teaching after schoolers. You have them 2 hours a day. And these kids, I think they're shocked. We're hitting the wall today. And I go, when you're walking to court 19 and 20, you're walking by the squash courts, that wooden surface. You should be hitting those balls. You walk in, walk in the front door, you look to your right, there's a track, you look through the windows, there's a swimming pool. Or you can sit in those nice chairs, buy a muffin, and look out the window and just yak, yak, yak. So where were you in comparison, you think? I mean, I ask people all the time, like say a Dave Anderson, who we've interviewed twice now, is it really changed that much? I mean, from the 80s to the 90s, from decade to decade, I think the kids get beat up a little bit, that they're softer. I mean, how would you touch upon that? Like, where were you as a teenager? Where would you compare your group to the group today? Have the coaches, and I think that, for me, players come and visit, and we yell 3-3, and the coaches who come to visit are the former players. Go 3-3. Used to be 1-1.
Yeah.
So we've gotten softer.
No, I definitely do. It's funny. I tell the guys all the time, like, oh, the coaches are so tough. And I said, when I was growing up, they were way tougher. Like, and I think it's just the times now. Like, and for me, I grew up. My dad was my coach. He was always pretty strict with me and stern. And I grew up with Richard. Like, Hubert was always great with incorporating discipline. The Japanese culture. Carlo was super stern. Like. And, I think Miron does a great job of doing that as well. I think I could definitely do a better job of being a lot more demanding. And I think that's one thing for me coming here is, like, I really see the impact of what a disciplined student and what that kind of focus can translate into. And I think a lot of the guys are right now, for them, like this past month has been a big wake-up call.
I do think Richard Hernandez, Richmond Hill Country Club for years, David Anderson, Brookhaven Country Club, and all the times I visited both those places, from a tennis standpoint, you don't feel like you're at a country club. But yet when the kids leave the court, especially in an indoor setting, it's a country club. I always tell people, if you can charge French fries, if your parents have an account and you can go to the snack bar and no one's there and they know you're having a Coca-Cola, no one knows you're having a Coca-Cola, that's where, like today, okay, we're hitting against the wall. at a public park, and then we go to a university, and it's a community setting. That one part of the university is just open to the public, and then it's just different. So you have to. Players can come from really nice facilities, but you just have to realize that, hey, wait a minute, this is a little too comfortable.
Yeah, I think that's one thing that, with the Calusa Park setting, I think, it just gives us that open freedom to really, just voice, just really coach. And, in a country club setting, there's limitations, there's members and.
Yeah, at this park this morning, the coach from Montreal and his player, you guys, not chicken liver, he's provincial champion. We did a 45-minute workout in the parking lot. No one hit a ball. And for people who are just getting into the coaching business, you try to do that, you're probably going to get fired. But the reason we can do that, it only works if you do the video work. It only works if you have the rationale. It only works if you can explain it to the kid with science, with sophistication, but also then with simplicity. One thing with Biran, like yourself, he grew up at Richmond Hill. Born in South Africa, I spent some time in Boston, but by the time he was like 9 years old, he was at Richmond Hill and loved the game, loved to compete. He loves any type of competition. So then he goes to college, and there's always controversy. Is that, someone told me to go left, told me to go right. There's not continuity from one coach to the next. There should be. Now, granted, personality comes into it, but you're just not getting, the guys tell me he uses a different grip. The guys tell me he uses a different swing. It's just, like comparing French to German. But Miran, he came and did a internship. It was a school year. It wasn't 12 months, but it was, I think, a healthy 9 months and these 18-hour days. But I think what's important is that, and I think it's very difficult for kids that are in regular school, but if they knew the history behind it, if they knew the history where, like today, you ask somebody, do you remember Andre Agassi? And a lot of the kids today, they wouldn't remember Agassi. And that's unfortunate. Like, here's this guy who hit the ball so well, and this is how he used his legs. Yeah, this is why he could just generate so much force. It just looked like he was snapping up every time and throwing a medicine ball. So anyway, that with Miran, tells a story where he had too much respect for pro tennis. He especially in doubles. The big guy always said he should have played hockey and been a stay-at-home defenseman. He didn't. He wasn't built for speed. So he has some success in doubles in juniors, ITF, and then he has some success in the college scene. After the internship, he's back in Canada. He's taking a group of kids to Futures, and he asked if he could play the next one. And long story short, short story long, they say, yeah, you can play the qualifiers. And he was fit, but he hadn't been playing. Lost 35 pounds at his internship, but he can look at a potato and put weight on. But anyway, he gets through the qualies, and I think it was 2 rounds, and third round loses, but he gets ATP points. But someone like that is going to, in a New York minute, look at someone and go, no, the guy doesn't force. The guy doesn't understand the geometry of the court. But I do think that's important that, for people perhaps to listen to our podcast, that if someone who's making that transition from college tennis and they want to be a teaching pro, they shouldn't get the job because they can hit the ball. They need to study. But speaking of controversy, the coaches being different, just today, and that's where people need to know with these phones is there's this constant, instant communication. So we work with a player, and then she ends up at the national campus, and then I'm talking to a coach who works at the national campus that we spent a lot of time with. I would say that Matt Kalora's brother, Chris, they were never fortunate enough to work or even to be with Vic Braden. I mean, their dad, Ernie, he obviously had respect for Braden. But that I would say they're Bradenites. You don't have to meet Braden to be a Bradenite. And This is something that for everyone, don't judge the unfinished product. If someone is going to have their kitchen remodeled, it's going to look worse before it looks better. And you got to build it down. You got to break it down to build it back up. But no, I could talk about my first visit to Richmond Hill. But go ahead. What else you got? You think back about your days, or
No, and I
what
think
would help the listeners?
I think that's the biggest lesson here for me is like, I look back as a coach just being here for a month, and again, like you said, it's the information, the knowledge that we're telling these kids is not much different from was 10, 20 years ago. And for me as a coach, I think I have a newfound respect for it, just having more knowledge of the history. And playing college tennis, we talk about coaches having different approaches and opinions, and that's what I struggled with growing up and playing college tennis. I went from having this great base knowledge always taught to me, and then I go and my grips are being changed, my toss is being changed, and it was hard to adjust, and it was hard to filter out, what do I believe, what do I listen to, and now like coming back and from a different perspective as a coach and having a great understanding of how important it is to have a good base, the great base, and what a difference it can make in terms of tennis careers. And a lot of kids, we get a lot of kids from different programs coming to us, looking for technical change. One girl who's been down here for a long time, 2 years ago, couldn't even hit a ball. It was just a walking injury, and now to see her...
13 months. Actually, today, driving the van, the boys were talking about her. And, I think one thing that got their attention is that we made videos for these kids, and she's already done her notes. And I let them know she's already handed her notes in. And you just like say, well, where's this going to end up? Where's this headed? And, you have, I don't think, and I just go, the chances of you sending me notes are slim and none, and Slim just left town. I'm not betting on you to send me notes. And prove me wrong. Sit down, because if you hear it, you forget it. The rate of forgetting, I love to, go through a few things and come back to point number one. So, okay, what was point number one? And, now we have kids bringing your group, they're bringing pencil and paper, but they're not writing anything down. They're just bringing the pencil and paper because they don't want to be reprimanded. And now they're not writing it down. They're not rewriting it down. They're not taking quiet time. And the rate of forgetting is scary. Actually, one thing with the GreatBase, it comes from Richard Hernandez, because he was telling me one time, and we certainly, as a group, shake our heads and just vent. Braden used to say, if you're venting, just say stop. But you're just going, oh, it's so bad. Oh, that kid, oh, the teaching, it's so bad. And if you have the influence from Braden, for example, you're in the know. You're just in the know. Sorry, you're just in the know. And but Hernandez is the one who said, Steve, used to be my student, now I'm his student. He said, tennis needs a great base initiative. I should say that again. Tennis needs a great base initiative. And then that's where, okay, that's be a great name for this pathway, all these systems that we've been studying. Richard Hernandez, I quote him often, Steve, in tennis, remember, people aren't stupid. They're completely, have to bleep this one out, effing stupid. Sometimes that F word, fire truck, it does work. So I'd like to get into talking about some of these Canadian players like Denis Shapovalov, who spent 10 years at your club. So when I first went to Richmond Hill, what comes to my mind is I go, and Dave Anderson goes with me. Richard calls up and goes, we need some help. And at that time, I'm still thinking of Anderson, like, okay, we're, he had worked for absolute peanuts. He was a lab assistant. And it's like, no, we just did the work. It wasn't really about money. And let's go. So Anderson goes with me, and we go up to Richard's place to help out. And Richard goes, we want to film everybody who hits balls. Okay. So we were there a week. And what I remember about that trip is that they were very nice. And I remember we had any quests. I said, yeah, I'd like to go to a hockey store. As a hockey player, I'd just like to be around the equipment. I've been away from the game for a long time. Let's just go see skates and sticks and gloves. And So we're on our way to just go to a hockey store during lunch break. So we go from this residential street. Next thing you know, we're out where there's 4 lanes of highway, four lanes of traffic on either side. And I remember Dave Anderson just says, "Stop the car." And he bolts out of the car. He's dodging in and out of cars, and he saves this kid's life. The kid's a toddler. He's like 18 months, 2 months. He's just walking in traffic. That's one thing I remember about that first trip. But also, that first trip, Harry Fritz was the director of tennis. And Richard, we didn't know that until after we were there, is Richard had been let go. He's a young guy in his 20s. I'm probably in my late 20s. I'd have to go back and just pinpoint what year it was. But Anderson and Hernandez definitely in their 20s, and the director doesn't want us to be there. It's like, oh, okay, that's a little awkward. Richard had been let go, but he was reinstated because of the way he taught tennis. And then I know Richard he still communicates with Harry Fritz. Now, Harry Fritz, the best player in America right now, highest ranked player is Taylor Harry Fritz, his nephew. And actually, he hits the ball so he starts to serve, starts to return. He starts the point so well, serving and returning. But we all know from the service line in, he's not the best that he could be. And, it's not a matter of, well, he's got to change now. The horse has been out of the barn a long time. The family, Taylor Fritz's family, actually offered Raven Clausen. They played team tennis, said, will you coach our kid? And I told Raven, you should have done it. At that time, Raven's thinking about his career, he's playing. I said, no, just coach the kid. Just film him, and just doesn't mean that you'd have to stop everything and coach him, but teach the kid how to volley. And, but that's where that started, and that's where it's so important to film. And it comes back to that Bradenism, the dimensions of the court. We'll have 20 people, 30 people, did it the other day. Repeat this theme. The dimensions of the court and physical laws dictate stroke production, no coach's opinion, and unique theory. So then you have no tennis arguments. Now people don't get past the forehand. But so anyway, with the grip, let's go with your thoughts. You spent a lot of time with Dennis. I know Richard hired his mother Tessa. Miran worked as a sparring partner. A guy like Taylor Fritz, he's right up there. I mean, you get to be top 20 in the world. You're a really good tennis player. He does such a great job forcing. But I remember Richard would call me up, and I'm doing more of that now, where these Zoom calls, talk to his staff. But I remember being on speakerphone, and that's one thing that Tessa never bought into with, I hate that expression, but Dennis, he has such an open racket face on both sides. He has calculation on his volleys, but he's aggressive. He's coming in. If people will go to YouTube and just plug in Dennis Shapovalov, age 8, Alexandra, I think she's the coach hitting with him.
Yeah, Alexandra's playing points with him.
And, I think we need to go back to Steckley, Robert Steckley, who we spent a lot of time with. He worked short term with Dennis. And I'm thinking they should hire Miran. But now Miran, he's married, got a kid, so it's like, well, I would have been saying they should have hired Richard. But to just tweak his game from the service line in. Jimmy Arias said about Dennis, I love this kid. He comes in, he's aggressive. He goes to the net all the time, but he doesn't know what to do when he gets there. But I think the better the player, the more they're going to be criticized. But just like in our country, whether it's Fritz or Francis Tiafoe, would someone, argue that Tiafoe, would be worse if when he was younger, not now, if he was younger, he was taught how to hit the backhand volley differently. But tell us a few things about Dennis. I mean, you're what, 2-3 years older?
Yeah, I'm a couple years older than him, but when my dad got a job at Richmond Hill, Tessa was hired shortly after, so I spent a lot of time with Dennis and Tessa. My dad and Tessa worked alongside each other for a couple of years, and I remember Dennis at a young age and growing up, and he was just always so aggressive when he played. He always believed, and he always projected this image that he was always going to be pro one day. And his game, at age 8, the way he was playing, is very similar to how he plays today. He was always going for his shots. He was never a typical under 10, under 12 player. He always went for his shots. It's similar to like players like other Canadian players like Bianca, Felix, they always played with this identity at a very young age. And, like they never had, they were never always the best at under 12, under 14, but, their real years shined later, where they really, really grew their game at a young age and let it just let it flourish now. So I think that's a good lesson for everybody. Is just like, and for me too, just reflecting like on my junior career, I wish I spent more time focusing on playing the right way and not as the result. And as a junior, I was very result based, result oriented. I focused on, I had a lot of success as a junior, and I just kept on doing what worked. I kept on doing what I was familiar with, and I never really stepped outside my comfort zone. And going to play college tennis, I was restricted on, coming forward. Like I didn't feel comfortable coming to the net. And as a junior, that was always something coaches always pushed me to do. And, eventually I did, but it was, I think I would have had a different path in terms of tennis if I'd focused and spent more time focusing on skill acquisition and, really stepping actually away from competition for a little bit just to build my game. And I think that's one thing you see a lot more. And I think, some of the kids that are here down before us, they've taken time off competition just to rebuild their games. And I think that's so important.
No, we could talk about your group. I think of your sister. I mean, provincial champion, indoor, outdoor, 18. She's 15. She's proven herself as a competitor. She needs to get in the gym, get on the track. I think she could flip it around. I mean, granted, she can still tweak some things, having the more racketed speed on the forehand, not pulling out with the left side. We go through player by player, and that's what's on film. Yeah, I mean, what can each player do? What's the prescription? So the idea of seeing the big picture when it comes down to success, that's what Richard remembers saying about Dennis. When that kid put his headband on, he was going to be a player. That's the number one is the inner belief system. Number two is the work ethic. And number three is the knowledge. And, you look at that tape of him on court 19, he's way ahead of the curve for a young kid that age. But coming to the net, I mean, that's like almost unheard of now, which is really sad. With Miran, he tells a story about taking him to like a provincial camp with 24 kids from Ontario, and he thought that Dennis was probably number 20. But, and they skipped out going to national tournaments, and didn't go all the way out to Vancouver. And but actually, Jeannie Bouchard, she had success before. She did really well at Wimbledon. She was 7th in the world. Dennis wins Junior Wimbledon. Felix, Bianca. But after you go back to 1989, Canada wins what was called the Sunshine Cup. There was the Sunshine Cup and the Federation Cup. And the Sunshine Cup, Federation Cup, it was the 18 and under equivalent of Davis Cup. I say Federation Cup. Get it right. The Continental Cup. It was Sunshine Cup and Continental Cup. They were dropped. And it was right when the Orange Bowl was played. And, 2-3 players would represent their country. So Sunshine, Davis Cup, Continental, Fed Cup. Of course, Fed Cup now is the Billie Jean King Cup. And Nestor was one of the players who's won so much. I guess he's finally retired at age 59. He's played forever. But Robert Janacek is from that group. And I remember training him on court 19. He was he played 1 at UCLA, so he's not chicken liver. He's a great tennis player. He's 2 in the NCAAs. But he had taken that step where he crossed the bridge and said, okay, I'm going to become a tennis teacher coach. So I started training him. And I remember, which we don't really do, you make a tape for someone, it's their tape. You don't share it. But because he wasn't playing anymore, I remember sharing that tape with Craig Tyler. He said, show your boys this. And this is when he was just building his program. So I mentioned earlier when Tyler was first at Illinois. Illinois it was obscurity. They were not on the tennis map. and he was recruiting really good sectional players. He couldn't get really good national players to go there. But so here's a guy who's at UCLA, and really, really good. And I go, get your guys to watch this slow motion tape. And he had holes in his game. Toss way over his head, the way he set for his forehand volley. It's really interesting, those three things. It's typical. One of our kids goes to a federation. It's not just here in the U.S., in Canada. I've worked with so many Canadian players that go to the Canadian Federation, and they're told, toss high, arch your back. That's one of the norms. Another one is have this horizontal pull on your forehand. And another one is you got to have downplay on your volleys. You got to slice your volleys. And I can remember Hubert was training. He was going to start playing again. So it was Hubert, Crash, Robert Janacek, and this character, Robert Steckley, who's so fast, same age group as Federer. And Federer one time said, when Steckley was assigned to him as a sparring partner, he'd been out of the game for a while, he signed to him as a sparring partner, and Federer goes, I always wonder what happened to that guy. He had more talent than any of us. I can remember Steckley showing him film. It's so much easier to show film indoors, and him just standing by the monitor. I go, Steckley, you have no power line. Your serve is an IP, But he was so talented. I remember Richard had so much fun with that. It took 4 or 6 weeks, and he started to practice. He was so excited to hit with Janacek and Hubert Crash. Like, I'm getting to play with these really good players, and it's like, hey kids, Janacek's throwing that toss way over his head and saying, Steckley, you need to be able to play this tabletop return. Just take it and just stick it up the middle, like a Jimmy Connors. It's almost like a lost art now. You just come in, the racket face is flat. You still finish up, and you're not in so many feet behind the baseline. With Steckley, I know he played a match for Canada Davis Cup, so he's a Richmond Hill kid. I didn't start him out. Ishvin Toth had coached him, and but I think he only was in the 400s. But what a talent! I remember being with Jeremy Wurtzman at a tournament, and he beat Steckley, and he's so happy because I never beat that kid. All the times we practiced, that kid would beat him. But I didn't give him the nickname. Jeremy Wurtzman, at one time, he was called the Turtle. Wasn't that fast when he was like in the 7th, 8th grade. And for that matter, he was never that fast. But Steckley was faster than fast. So many stories, Richmond Hill. What about, we got a kid here from Romania with your group, and he's Canadian, but his parents are Romanian. And his sister's good friends with Bianca Andreescu. What about her? So you know her story.
Yeah, I only known her recently in the last few years. I didn't really know her very well as a junior, like a young junior, but I've heard stories of her as when she was younger. There was a girl, Maria Tănăsescu, who was, both of them were competing against each other, under 12s, under 14s, and Maria was the better one of the two. But Bianca always played the aggressive game, and at under 12, under 14, that game style very rarely works. But she kept the same thing I did about Dennis is, at a young age, she always played with an identity of how she wanted to play as an adult, and you can see her game. That's one thing. She's just so fearless, and she's always been fearless at a young age. And I know her both on and off the court. I've seen her like at her lowest and her highs on court, and off court. One thing that she does so well, she's so humble. She's had a lot of success on tour already, and you could be walking by the street and she'll say hi to you. She's so sweet.
Bad luck with injuries.
She's always had a lot of injuries growing up, but she's always bounced back. And but with her game style, it's like when she's on and healthy, like she's a force, and it's always a lot of fun to watch. Dennis is the same way. We have a lot of Canadians who are just so entertaining to watch. I think that's why we're on everyone's radar.
Richard, he has 10 grass courts. And he said that, Bianca's come out to his place before the grass court season. And obviously great, but really more of a raw competitor. I know that you can see, the signs where she copied Halep, and there's positives. But I do think that that's one thing that the sooner the better. The sooner the better. When we say teach refined skills, is slow kids down. Can they really play volleys? Because can they play all three zones of the court? I get so tired hearing serve plus one. Let's change gears a little bit. 2020, if we were to, I don't know if we're there, but 20 players from the past, 20 teachers from the past. You go back and reflect. You can learn so much about the experiences, days gone by. History, they say, is, you've heard experience is the best teacher, history is the best teacher. But again, I do think people need to reflect. On this trip, certainly the parents, we talked about having a Zoom call with all the kids that were here. Great kids. We're not talking about them becoming great kids. Obviously, we want them to be great human beings. But, the great tennis players, they all want to play college tennis or beyond.
Yeah.
And that's like, okay, SATs, your, what does it go? You're in order, your GPA, your SAT, your UTR. And everything is your UTR. Them going to the track today, anything that can be measured, what's interesting, and Richard and Mira would know this, is that it's for you to now be older and have come down here with groups before, but now to be in a leadership capacity. I've told people for a long time, some kids taking lessons at a club for 2 weeks, and then they come and spend 2 weeks with us. We know more about that kid. Just because we see them 24/7. See him 24/7. With another group, we could get into stories. Dave Anderson sent me a tennis player one time, and he was obnoxious to a waitress, and I gave him the gears. And the next day, he was obnoxious again. And I had a group of, say it was a dozen kids. It was 2 minivans. Haz Izwan from Malaysia, the 2 of us, and we had a place to stay. There was the sectionals at that time. It was before Daytona. It was several years ago for Florida tennis. And Vic Braden was in town in Orlando. So we had a lot of fun, a lot of things going on. But this young kid, every place we went to eat, no one talked to a waiter the rest of the time. So we go in and I go, okay, no vegetarians. All right, I'll have 12 orange juices, 12 scrambled eggs, bacon, and toast. And we're out the door. Then we go to Subway, and everyone is getting, I'll take 12 roast beef sandwiches, whatever, turkey sandwiches, go to Olive Garden. Did it for the rest of the time. Those are the stories that. But let's go with this group. So value for the listeners. If we could go with this, you name a player, and I could just tell you something about their technique or tactics. So, just with a Canadian group, give me the name of a player. Just go first name.
We can start with Zach.
Zach, he came down here on his own, and we feel like he was a different guy when he came on his own. And granted, it was a blink of an eye. But great kid, voids his backhand, puts himself out of position, and he's in that 98% group where he's looking to hit a forehand. He's got to really work on balance. Unfortunately, he's been sick last few days. But today on the backboard, just drop hit balls. You're really sick, but just shadow swing. And he's a bright kid, but it's like, come on, you want to learn to hit a backhand, you got to hit a backhand. Your backhand's not going to get any better by running around it. Go ahead, give me another player.
Let's talk about Radine.
Radine, I was told he does really well in school. He was apologetic. He put his palms up. We always say, don't put your palms up unless you're talking to an umpire. It's totally out of control. So he comes in, and I say, okay, go do this drill. And then he requested another drill. And he gave me the roll of the eyes, palms went up, and then he was like, okay. And then, I let him know that I can turn up the intensity a little bit. And so fair enough, he was apologetic about it. But, he needs to circle his backhand. He needs to go high, low, high, inside out. He needs to have a circular swing on his backhand so he can hit circular spin. But then when he plays, he hits a one-handed underspin backhand. People just, Roger Federer, I didn't know you're supposed to win in practice. Practice is practice. Imagine a musician. Musicians, I know nothing about it, but they're practicing a song and we got to start over. No, we got to start over. No, we got to start over. And they do it again and again and again. And they have to work on parts and pieces and such and such. But, common sense is not common. So is he going to hit off a cone? Is he going to get in front of a mirror? Is he going to get a foam ball and go to your squash courts and go, just kick your heels and go, I am hitting a topspin backhand return. And if you're going outside in, this is why you hit side spin, and then you don't hit it. And you got to get the same message over and over again. And if you keep telling the person the same thing, our listeners know we use this line, there's 2 million time clubs. You're in the wrong million time club. I'm going to have to tell you this a million times. You need to just do it a million times. And that's where we say, okay, the kid doesn't understand the connection between the bench and the brain. We've broken down point play, and kids don't get to GVP. They don't get to the 10.5 foot mark when their pro shot bounces. That's where slow it down, play 50% tennis, play with some wooden rackets. Go ahead.
Eric.
Eric's been at your club a long time. Said, Eric, you don't know how to hang on to the racket. Eric, keep it a secret. Don't tell anyone that Richard Hernandez, Miran Mann, the other coaches had anything to do with your game. He can compete playing a set. He can compete playing a match. But to compete at the dinner table, compete at the track, I think this is hopefully for all of them. It's been a life-changing experience. So say he's 15. I think he's like several of them 15. So they got 75 years to work on their game for the 90 and over. But college tennis, time is running out. But then how we talk to him, I understand that Slippery Rock is a really nice school. For the longest time, I didn't know there was a Slippery Rock. When I was a kid, the coach would say, you're going to play at Slippery Rock University. And I go, well, it must be, there's no Slippery Rock. But I came up with the college called I Stink U. And, so where are you going to go? Where are you going to go? Who's going to be calling you in 18 months? Great player within. All of them are 4 inches away from being a great player. The distance between their left ear and right ear. We've met the enemy. The enemy is us. Their enemy is looking right at them when they look in the mirror. They got to conquer themselves. Go ahead.
Gian?
Your sister, I've said many times, of course, we had this kid from Quebec join us, but I said, she's the best tennis player here. She's the only one who's won the provincial title. Great focus, fighter. She played a match against a younger player who's a provincial champion from Ontario. Really cold. The ball's, it's rubber, so it expands, contracts. The ball's not going anywhere. The wind's blowing. But it was just a battle of defense. She's got to add offense to her game. She's got to understand the green light point. She needs to, and it's very difficult to change tactics. It's not as difficult as say changing a grip, but she needs to get in the gym, get on the track, and she needs to learn to force. I think of Bill Jacobson, a kid I coached who played at SMU. He played another kid who played at Texas. And the only time the kid who played at SMU won a set was when CompuTennis was critiquing the play. And I was never, it was in a very nice way, said, the way you're playing won't work. The way you're playing won't work. I know Austin Krajicek, he's going to be in town for this Delray Beach tournament that's coming up, and communicated with him a little bit, get him on the podcast, and he's coached by Philip Farmer. And his father has told me, Rob Krajicek, who's been on our podcast, that Philip's been very, very good for him. And I don't know Philip that well, but I know he's a really upbeat guy. I know he coached the Bryan brothers. Motivational speaker. I've listened to a tape that's online. So one of my students played him and beat him years ago at a tournament called the Cotton Bowl. And it was a back draw, 14s. And I tried to explain to my the father of the kid I coached, that his son had won on the scoreboard, but he really lost because he didn't force. Guys missing volleys and missing overheads. So your sister, she really needs to add. No, I came back and told her, I said, you don't want to have the picture that you feel like you have to always be a net rusher, that offense is rushing the net. 4 great players, Agassi and Graf, of course now they're husband and wife, but then Navratilova and Sampras are all offensive players. The baseliners shouldn't be typecast. Like today we had kids inside the baseline, hitting against a wall, hitting the ball as hard as they could. And it's going to help their footwork, their timing, the swing's going to become short, compact. I would say there's far more tennis players have been developed hitting against a wall. I think of the 3 players from the place in Maryland that's highly acclaimed in the U.S. Junior Ori, who we spent time with, Tiafoe. I was at a tournament, 2 tournaments back to back. I know he played some doubles with my son. So Tiafoe, he's a different generation. I got that wrong. So he's from the same club, but he's taken it to the highest level. But before them, there was the kid who won throughout the juniors, Mitchell Frank. And freshman year, he goes out and he wins All-Americans. And he had this mentality. So you got Junior Ori, who had speed, Mitchell Frank, who had this great mind. And then you had Kudlow, who hit the ball the best of the 3. But I was just told when he was a kid they couldn't pull him off the backboard. Sometimes you're better off just to hit against the backboard. You'll learn to hit the ball better by just hitting the backboard than you will taking a lesson. But with that being said, most people, they're trying to knock the backboard down. But go ahead.
Felix,
that's the kid with the YouTube forehand. And, don't be too sensitive. No, you have a YouTube forehand. That's how a snake goes down a hole. And, get your hand on the racket, not off the racket. He's wearing, these kids that are carrying a Babolat racket is like a legal weapon. And, he's got to slow down. He's got to really love. There's no difference between playing a set. He loves to compete, which is a great thing. There's always a positive, negative, positive. Coach Natalia has been great for him. That you don't like technique. Coming back to Eric, top of the list. Well, you don't like fitness and you don't like technique. Quit taking your parents' money and flushing it down the toilet. It's like, you got to love it. You got to love it.
Aiden Wangfang.
He's been taught great tools. Doesn't know how to use the tools. But he's not knowledgeable in our world. It's that's where your guys have not studied content. And I know you said, I think that's a great thing for you to say as a leader. I try to say that all the time. My fault first. We don't want kids to be on social media, but we have well over 10 years of content on Facebook. And take a few minutes, and then we tell people, if you're not studying the content we have, you're a part-timer. Now, granted, we have all these podcasts now, and they're so lengthy that we have to go back and ask some people that are very supportive of what we do. Would they take notes on podcast 1? We can maybe get a group of 10 people together, take notes on the podcast. We're not doing that, but you ask kids questions, they have to have answers. And I look at a group of kids, and it's like they're in high chairs, and we're just spoon feeding them. And you tell them over and over and over again. But it's, I had a gentleman tell me one time, a kid is still a kid. The kid's the same, but the times have changed. And, I have 3 older brothers, and they never, my guess would be pretty accurate, I think, that they never saw themselves on video, going off to a hockey school, and that didn't exist. But it came along by the time I was at hockey school, where they're showing you a few things. But now it's just overload. The content. Peter Burwash used to say the easiest places to teach tennis, and he may be the most traveled person into all of tennis in the history of the game. Is the easiest place to teach tennis is where kids haven't been watching tennis on TV. And I got that today and say, well, so-and-so does this and so-and-so does that. So the boy from Montreal asked questions. He's shy, introverted. I said, I need you to ask questions. And the juniors will start asking, well, Djokovic hits the ball this way. Nadal hits the ball this way. And my answer to that is, well, we need to go through it in slow motion because you'll see they're not violating physical laws. But don't go with imitation, go with science. Go with science. And it's not rocket science. I mean, it's not rocket science. But if you don't know the shape of the court, you don't know 19.1 degrees, how could you teach tennis? If you don't know how narrow that court is. You don't know, what happens during the hitting zone, and you're out there telling people, turn the doorknob. Go ahead. Malik's been here before. It was a life-changing experience for him. His father, Raj, just told me that. Out the door, running. I credit Natalia for that. But he's back, and it's like, no, we got to find buttons to push and get on his case. But he responds so well to coaching. Now, he's lost a couple of the older guys in practice, but that's brawn versus brain. They're just out banging him. They outweigh him by 40 pounds. And with his eyes, you tell people, look at the bounce, look at the target, confirm, reconfirm, keep your eyes at the hit. And you got to train yourself to do that. I think that's where, if you were to study what people do in acting school, James Lipton with the actor studio, he's passed away. I used to have students watch that tape, and then I would take clips from that tape. And so then I don't want to contradict myself, but so they are imitating someone, but they do it over and over and over again. People read about the girls that were in the movie King Richard. It wasn't like they looked at it for 5 minutes and they go, okay, I got it, I'm going to go out and copy it. They're looking at it. There's experts in the room looking at it with them. There's directors and producers, and they're doing it 8 hours a day. Go ahead.
Emma,
I need to put this on a tape. Still need to make her technical tape. I remember hearing Braden say that they need to learn to hit the ball 20 miles per hour. You can't blast everything. Her racket face is open on the backhand side, but her backhand is so much better than her forehand. But she needs to understand end the point in a point-ending situation. She didn't realize in some of your other kids, so Natalia's daughter, she's hitting the ball better and better, but, maybe soaking wet, she weighs 50 pounds. And, you're hitting with someone, it's so great to practice with players that hit the ball slower. So then you have time to work on things. And but she has to reduce unforced errors. But when you miss, why you miss, take accountability. And, she's got to, just like all the kids, you got to own the cone. And it's amazing how people are like just shocked that they have to do that in tennis. You put a baseball player, you put a swing coach and put the baseball on the tee. I mean, you can watch the major leaguers work on that. But tennis kids, they need to go back to some basics. But I think she could play. She's overall well taught. So, but the Band-Aids still require, even though it's not like she needs major surgery on any part of her game, she has an overall good-looking game. But the Band-Aids still require acceptance, awareness, acceptance, commitment. But going back just to with the lessons, you start to talk about, you mentioned players and teachers with, like say your sister on the serve or Robert Steckley on the serve. Same thing. The body's going left and the body's going backwards. Period. It's the end of story. You're not generate forces in the upward direction. Braden, you can't shoot a cannon from a canoe. You're not stabilized. Go ahead.
Braden.
Improved so much. Mother's grave and Pete teasing the mom, telling her, no, we're not going to charge you for the tennis, but it's $1,000 a text. Two moms, and mom who was not with your group, but here, so many positives from both of them. But I walk by and I tell young coaches I train, okay, you can't talk the way I talk, but I walk by and I say, hey, my psycho moms, how you doing? And, then the kids know I've said that. And I go, yeah, psycho hard and psycho soft. And with, that's where with Braden's mom, Psychosoft. And I think most moms, that's just natural. Mommies baby their babies. So like today, it's raining. Well, it just sprinkled all day. And from the book Amazing Racers, Bill Harris, it's only a bad day if there's thunder and lightning. That's the only thing that's stopping you, is thunder and lightning. So now we're February. This is a high school in Fayetteville Manlius in central New York. So I used to go see my mom and read the Post-Standard, and I started reading about this cross-country team. So before his book came out, I was like, this is an amazing culture. It's probably like the best. It's got to be one of the best cultures in American sport. And, the two key words, Spartan and Stoic. Spartan and Stoic. So I'll go back to the last one name again. Oh, so Braden, yeah. Is that tough love. There's soft love, tough love, and crazy love. And you need a little bit of all three. And everybody needs to be aware of that. And he's a good player. He's a good player. But then you hit somebody with, this is how Richard would talk. You just played Malik, and he tattooed you. He beat you like the bongos. He used you like a bar of soap. But then, the kid's looking at you like shock therapy. Is he really talking to me this way? But what I think parents need to understand is junior tennis doesn't really prepare you for college tennis. Junior tennis players are not in a locker room until they get to college. And, they lose and they get in the car and they zoom away. Now, if you're at a local tournament and your kid loses, bring him back to the tournament. And don't make a big deal of it, but be in the background and have your kid watch who they lost to. Welby Van Horn, who's your daddy? And I know it's difficult to do if you're 4 hours away and you got a long car ride, but no, you go back and you watch who you lost to, and then you find out they're not that good.
Yeah, that's exactly what happened this weekend. My sister played a tournament this weekend. She lost first round in type 3-setter match, and she was fortunate to come the next day and spend the day at the tournament. And she saw most of the points that the girl played, most of the matches. The girl ended up winning 2 or 3 rounds after her match. And, she looked at me and was like, I could have, this match could have been so different if I just done 1 or 2 things differently.
No, she's not doing what she's taught. Play at Jimmy Connors. Play the way you're taught. I had her, Robert Wojcik, Carla Navarro. Carla, that's her maiden name, Navarro. I had your daughter go watch this girl Monica play. And Monica could do, I watched her play a couple practice matches a month ago. And, I've worked with her. I've known her a long time. She could do things better like everybody. But I just said, go watch her play. And I said, she's getting more out of systematic training than you are. A system is an organized plan. What I think one thing that needed to be said over and over again is, your sister's playing, and even if she had won, she would have played the wrong way. Just Ash Barty, let the chips fall. You got to listen to these top players. I'm just going to let the chips fall where they fall. She's a great interview. People could learn so much by listening to her. Your group is there. We went 3 tournaments, so we go to the Battle of Boca back to back, and there's all these backboards. So the first weekend, I grind them. I give them a little bit of a tip. Okay, guys, you could put 15 minutes on the backboard and 45 minutes watching. Ivan Lendl at one point, he would do that. He wasn't going to play a match till later in the day, hit 15 minutes, be 45 minutes off. Or if you're coming back from a layoff, an injury, some travel, is you don't have to go practice 3 hours, practice 3 times for 45 minutes. And just to hear those pearls of wisdom. So we go back to second weekend, and I didn't say anything. That's the Tony Nadal. Just let them fail. Life gives you the test first and the lesson second. So they don't even go to the backboard. They don't even think about it. But also, too, is not one of them took any notes, to my knowledge. I asked them, and you could tell me otherwise. But when I did, after that one day, we call it a character meeting. Okay, let's sit down. Who took notes? So they're not really a program. They're not really a team. They're not really a family. They're not taking notes. They're not helping anybody else. Hey, I watched your match. And, maybe it's not a place for a young kid to say, well, I watched your match and you need to do this. But just chart 10, 20 points for your friend. I always tell people, the kids, they're your buddies. And buddies, all they do is steal your time. A friend is somebody you're going to really turn to in a crisis. That's where people are fortunate when their parents are their friends. But coming back to Braden, he's a lot better player than he thinks he is. Really have two sides of it. You have people who are cocky. One just comes to my mind right away, and he was called to the carpet on that. The coach from Montreal and the player from Montreal, who's the best player at your club, and they start talking about the last set they played. That's when you know someone doesn't know tennis. If someone played 10 times, okay, you played 10 times. What was the breakdown? And you listen to people played a long time. Yeah, we played once, and I was fortunate to get through that day. Is that it?
Yeah, those are the guys.
We could go back another even. One we do that with kids. Okay, let's go 3 rounds. It could be 3 questions. Better yet, a feedback exchange. I learned that from Burwash at the end. Sit everybody down and say, okay, let's have a feedback exchange. I want at least 3 things that you learned from today's practice or from today's experience. And you got to go home and you got to put them in a journal. And you got to write it down. But no, I think talking to yourself, 3 generations going back. So when Anderson and I first went to Richmond Hill, it was in the 80s. It would have been, I would guess, maybe Richard couldn't go back and say, no, it was 90, 91. But it was a long time ago. It was, I met Richard and David in the 80s. So maybe by the time he was there, it was early 90s. But it's been a long time. And you just mentioned a handful of people. There's more. There's so many people. There's so many people for years that Richard started. And Richard, it was like he was on an island too, because we train people and they go someplace, Richard was fortunate that he was put in charge. We trained so many people. The group from Montreal that was here, I should say, the 2 individuals. There's a coach who's from Germany who's been in Montreal a long time, and if you're not in charge, it's like you're on an island. So Richard, he had many people start. I think now the Canadians, I've said it before, they definitely have a superiority complex in hockey. They used to have an inferiority complex in tennis. I have to say this, is that last night you and I we met with we had the end of the day meeting. We had a character meeting because we definitely wanted the coach and the player from Montreal to experience a character meeting. So you and I are meeting, and a coach I've trained a long time ago, Mike Custer, reminded me that this hockey game was on, and I wouldn't have known, but thank him for reminding me. So I watched last night, and I would like to say I love Canada, I love Canadians, but not when the 2 countries play. So the Canadian women win. It was last night's preliminary round 4-2. But I think they play again on February 16th, and pulling for the U.S. to win. Why do I have that chip on my shoulder is that when I was a kid, the Americans weren't even considered. The Canadians got the first shot. Granted, back then, the Canadians in Ontario were going through grade 13. But I went to so many college hockey games with my father, and it was mostly Canadians. And then I went and played college hockey, and when I went out for a team, I made the team, and one of my brothers played at the same school, so I had a name tag, Smith, because my brother was there. But the name tags were already ordered for the Canadian kids that were recruited, and not for the Americans. So, but I was in Canada living in 1996, and granted, I think it was Adam Deadmarsh, Jim Rogers. There's somebody. He'll call me up and tell me I'm all wrong on this. I think it was because he's someone who I've trained who was at Richmond Hill. Great guy, true Canadian, not a paper Canadian. So Winnipeg boy. I think it was Adam Deadmarsh and Brett Hall. They played for Team USA, but Team USA won the World Cup, and I was living in Canada at the time, and I think the Canadians were ready to go to war. They were pretty upset that they lost to the USA in hockey. I can say this one last thing that I think that's funny about hockey. Then then you tell me about your experience with hockey people, what people growing up and that mentality, because I don't have a tennis mentality. So Don Cherry was a hockey player, didn't quite make it to the NHL, played one game, played in the American Hockey League, Rochester. So his hockey career's done. He works construction. He sells cars. He starts coaching high school hockey. I think it was in Pittsburgh, New York. But anyway, he gets into coaching, and the next thing you know, he's in the NHL. But then he becomes a color commentator, and people who are my age, they would remember a TV character called Archie Bunker. He was the Archie Bunker of Canadian hockey. He was pro-Canadian. And the younger brother always loves it when someone picks on the older brother. So my older brother becomes a general manager in the NHL, but he's an American, and it's not too many Americans in the NHL, period. When I was a kid, really young, there's only 6 teams, there were only 2 Americans. So he's a general manager, and my mother never liked Don Cherry because of this. I thought it was great. So he's an American, he's got a PhD, and he didn't play in the NHL. Like, what's this guy doing running a hockey team in the NHL? And Don Cherry said, Mike Smith, I think he wears borrowed clothes and combs his hair in the wind. And I go, that's great. But you tell me, I mean, I heard you talking to the kids about hockey. That is something we here in the States say in Canada it's a religion. I've heard you say that when you say that to our listeners about the hockey mentality. There's 3 types of sports: non-contact, contact, collision. I tell tennis kids all the time, especially the boys, I'd like to see you in a helmet. I would love to see you in a helmet. Doesn't need to be violent, but I mean, you got to have a little courage. What do you got?
Well, yeah, we talk about it all the time. We bring it up all the time when we're doing fitness, and how would they stand up on a hockey team? A lot of them don't really show the athleticism and that backbone that most guys on a hockey team would have. And I think that's the problem with tennis is they don't have that team environment. And in a team sport like hockey, they're always pushing each other, and it's like it creates this culture of toughness. And you talk about how football and American football is such a great culture for that too, where they're always we talk about being a team and analyzing things to help each other out. And I think that's something going forward, this particular group, and for next generations to come, I think that's something to really emphasize. And going to a tournament, you're not just going to look after yourself. You're going to look for ways to help your teammates or your people you train with grow, because then ultimately it helps your environment too. And for me, my first experience, like you said, most tennis players won't step into a locker room until they go to college, and that was my first experience too. So adjusting to that team environment was something that I had to learn from too. And I was always looking out for myself, always looking out for what was best for me. And it changed to having to look out for my teammates as well. And everything was, if one person improves, the group as a whole improves, and that's how you're going to improve as a player. So yeah,
I think a lot of tennis teachers, a lot of physical trainers in the U.S., it's a client. I'm working with my client. Well, maybe you could use that term with adults, but not in juniors. You'll say this in hockey. I was fortunate to work with figure skaters. My father was a hobby coach. My older brothers, I listened to those figure skaters. I remember going to extra classes. I remember going to hockey school in Toronto and writing a letter and getting permission to pass the expert swimming test. So I didn't have to take swim lessons. I could take more skating lessons. And now I would say everybody in hockey can fly. And hockey's improved so much. Tennis, not the case. I mean, we got people on the tour. They're on the tour because they're physical specimens and they're warriors. And, that the technique, it's, you look at someone like Medvedev, nothing but respect. But anyone who really studies the game is that he could have better volleying technique on the backhand side. Just leave it at that. But that mentality. But when you say that about Medvedev, he's got the hockey mentality. Another thing is that coaches would say, if I was going to go to war, would I pick that kid? And I get extreme and think all young boys would benefit if they played tackle football when they're just very, very young. Years ago we did this, if you read Bill Harris's book, Amazing Racers, he does this with his cross-country team. They circle up, they're doing exercises, and he just says, hit it. And they all dive on the dirt. They all dive in the mud because, he's a genius. So it's like, hey, this is what's going to happen. You're going to fall down in a cross-country race. You're just going to get back up. You got to get dirty. I quit doing that. I used to do that with tennis kids. It's like, hey, it's raining. This will be good. Let's get them over here. We'll get them dirty. You got to go home. And then you start training and you not only bring a different pair of shoes because you're running, but you bring a different pair of shoes because you're going to be in the mud. And I know that I have to back off. I have to keep a lid on coaching kids because, I've been working with them for a year, 2 years, 3 years. Well, now I can step it up. You just shock them if you step it up from the beginning. The Argentine, what the Americans call coaching, we call child's play. What we call coaching, the Americans call child abuse. But no, 3 generations. It's been great to have your group here. I hope it has been a life-changing experience. Love to have you come back. The connection with, I think that's what it really takes. Like say with, Mira, I talked to him on the phone tomorrow, and when you know somebody really well, people know it takes a minute just to catch up with someone. Like, hey, what's going on? And then also too, is information is information. The tennis court's still a rectangle. The facts are the facts. And, the game has evolved, but I think that's a crock, that the game has changed so much. I mean, come on. The gravity is gravity, the laws of physics. But anyway, it's been great to have you visit. I hope the listeners have got something out of this podcast. I hope there was some perspective, some points made.
No, thank you so much for having me. This past month, like 5-6 weeks have been probably the most insightful and probably the greatest learning experience I've had. And I've learned not only a lot about the students I've brought down, but I've also learned a lot about myself and just reflecting on the information that I've known my whole life. It's like this information we share with all of our students is stuff I've heard from a very young age, and I've found a newfound respect for it. Definitely going forward, it's like I see the importance and the value of just instilling like a great base on just focusing on skill acquisition. That's something that I look back and I wish I focused more on versus results. And I think for young guys, no matter the age, I think it's important to just continue to keep on building skills and develop your game as a whole versus, just focusing on what works and just being open-minded.
Yeah, are you a 1 or 2? Ones are all in. You're only either 1 or 2. You're either all in or you're not. You love the process will love you back. And, the winning is just thrive on the opportunity and, with how you've worked so hard for these kids. And, certainly the parents sacrifice to make this a reality, give them the chance to do this. And the worthiness, do they really appreciate, what's given to them? And it is a vehicle. It's, the winning's a bonus. Competing it was all about, and the competing is not just tournament time. Every day is a tournament. Every situation is a tournament. But Gino, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much.
All right, listeners, hope you got something out of this podcast. 79, I believe, in the books. Adios, amigos.
Thanks, guys.